All right, we're learning more about what President-elect Donald Trump's second term in office might look like and who will be part of his team. Campaign manager Susie Wiles became the first appointee announced last night. She will serve as Trump's White House chief of staff, becoming the first woman to hold the role. And for more on this, I want to bring in CBS News campaign reporter Olivia Rinaldi. So, Olivia, Wiles is a pretty known entity in Washington. What can you tell us about her and how influential her new role is?
Yeah, good morning, Tom. Good to be with you. It was breaking news here out of Palm Beach last night when Susie Wiles was tapped to be who was once Trump's campaign manager, I should say, is now going to be his chief of staff. And Wiles is known as being a quiet, methodical presence on the campaign. I should also know she's the only campaign manager that has ever lasted an entire cycle with Donald Trump. His campaign managers in 16 and 20 got fired about halfway through. Susie lasted the entire time, and she's beloved by people on the campaign. Yesterday, when I was speaking with aides and advisors, there's not a single person who didn't have amazing things to say about Susie. However, she will be going to Washington, which is different than running a campaign. And it's actually her first job in Washington. She's a known entity among Florida politics, but it's her first time going to Washington, D.C., really having to make a mark there, learn the ins and outs of government. So we'll be watching closely over the coming days after this selection who Donald Trump could pick to fill out the rest of his cabinet.
We are learning more about what President-elect Donald Trump's cabinet will look like this morning. At least two major spots have already been filled, with the big one announced this morning. CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang is live for us this morning in West Palm Beach. Weijia, good to see you. All right, so we can now confirm Trump's pick for both border czar and the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. What more can you tell us?
That's right, Vlad. For border czar, we know that Trump has chosen Tom Homan, who worked with him in the first administration as the acting director of ICE. And then for the ambassador to the United Nations, Congresswoman Elise Stefanik of New York. And one thing that both of these people have in common, Vlad, is their loyalty to the president-elect over the years. They have been staunch Trumpers. They have been able to not only share the same view as Trump, but in both of these cases, be very vocal about it. If you look at clips, whether it's, on the House floor for the Congresswoman, whether it's testifying before the Senate for Tom Homan or during TV interviews, they are very able to speak the Trump language, meaning they are very brash, they are very to the point, and they don't try to dance around things that might be viewed as offensive, especially when it comes to the issue of immigration for Tom Homan. And so he really views this as a black and white issue, Vlad. Our colleague Cecilia Vega recently asked him in an interview whether there is any good way to deport a family, any humane way to do that. And he said, yeah, you deport the entire family. And so he views it as very black and white in the sense that either you are here legally or you are not. But he has also said, Vlad, that this isn't going to be a sweeping roundup of everybody who is here and undocumented. He says it will be very precise at first and going after people who are here illegally and also could be committing crimes. And, he says they have a list of people that they want to round up first, Vlad.
All right, switching gears, we have some breaking news out of Mar-a-Lago. President-elect Donald Trump expected to name Stephen Miller as White House Deputy Chief of Staff. Miller will join the appointment of other key roles announced over the weekend, including former acting ICE Director Tom Homan, who will serve as the administration's border czar. New York Republican Congresswoman Elise Stefanik is taking on the role of UN ambassador, and Susie Wiles as Chief of Staff, the first woman to serve in that role. CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang is in West Palm Beach, Florida for us, where the president-elect is huddling right now, Weijia, with his transition team. Let's start with Stephen Miller. What can you tell us about this possible appointment?
Liz, it's great to be with you. Well, I think this is an indication of where the second Trump administration is heading in terms of who will be making the calls and fulfilling the president's agenda. And so you're right, Stephen Miller is expected to be the White House Deputy Chief of Staff of Policy. And remember, during the first administration, he served as a senior advisor to the president and director of speech writing, and he was known as a controversial figure in large part because of his hardline immigration stances. He played a huge role in Trump's zero tolerance policy, which ended up separating families at the border, and also in Trump's Muslim ban. And so it's no surprise, Liz, that he is going to take on this role as Trump gears up to implement what he calls the biggest mass deportation in this country's history. And so Stephen Miller is a Trump loyalist, and so are all the other names that you mentioned. So I think that really tells us that Trump is putting a premium on loyalty, which is nothing new. But the difference is that he is handpicking people who will help him carry out his agenda and really cutting away the possibility of anyone trying to steer him in a different direction, Liz.
Yeah, he's vowing to keep his promises that he made during the campaign, Ouija.
We're continuing to follow Donald Trump's second term in the White House as he begins to fill out top positions in his administration. As we mentioned, the president-elect has selected who he wants to lead the Environmental Protection Agency. Trump announced Monday he will nominate former Republican Congressman Lee Zeldin of New York. Here's what Zeldin said about his priorities in an interview shortly after the announcement was made public.
So day one and the first 100 days, we have the opportunity to roll back regulations. There are regulations that the left wing of this country have been advocating through regulatory power that ends up causing businesses to go in the wrong direction.
For more, let's bring in national environmental correspondent David Schechter. David, so good to have you here in New York. I want to go ahead and pull up Lee Zeldin's tweet announcing that he was honored for this appointment. If we could pull that up so I could read a little bit. So he says, we're going to restore U.S. energy dominance, revitalize our auto industry to bring back American jobs, and make the U.S. the global leader of AI. We'll do so while protecting access to clean air and water. Rolling back regulations, boosting energy and auto production, but also protecting clean air and water. Are those opposing ideas, or can they do it all?
I think the answer is potentially they're not opposing, but I think in reality you have to look at what President Trump is trying to accomplish with the EPA. He wants to, as largely as possible, reduce the influence of the EPA, eliminate regulation, go after climate change policies, and the EPA is the place where you do that. So he said that's what he wanted to do. He brings in a congressman, former congressman, who's very loyal to him, who's really has no history of showing really any interest in the EPA, has voted with environmental issues only 14% of the time. And so this is most likely, you'd have to say, this is the tool that President Trump-elect is going to use to reduce the power of the EPA.
It is a busy time here in Washington as America's new government is taking shape. And we have a team of correspondents on hand to break it all down for you, beginning with CBS's Ouija Zhang, who's covering the Trump transition in West Palm Beach, Florida. Good evening, Ouija. What a busy day.
Good evening to you, Nora. Every staffing announcement provides further confirmation that Trump rewards those who are devoted to him and passionate about implementing his agenda, which includes untangling the U.S. from foreign conflicts and his signature item, securing the border.
Make no mistake, an invasion of our country is happening, and our border is a war zone.
South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem is considered a hardliner on immigration. And if confirmed as DHS secretary, she would be at the forefront of the plan to deport millions of undocumented immigrants, along with border czar Tom Homan and the architect of the plan, Stephen Miller. With more than 260,000 employees, DHS includes ICE and the Office of Customs and Border Protection. But Noem would also oversee the Secret Service and FEMA, among other departments.
I'm very good friends with him.
Noem, considered a Trump loyalist, was among the first Republican governors to endorse him.
Kristi, I'm truly honored to receive your endorsement, very much so.
Early in the campaign, she was on the shortlist to be the vice presidential nominee until her memoir revealed she shot her dog because it was untrainable, causing an uproar.
Hello, thank you for joining us. We begin our report with President-elect Donald Trump offering his former rival a key role in shaping U.S. foreign policy. Trump is expected to name Florida Senator Marco Rubio as his Secretary of State. If confirmed by the incoming Republican-led Senate, Rubio will become the nation's top diplomat amid ongoing conflicts in the Middle East and Ukraine. In an interview late last month, Rubio said this about dealing with Russian President Vladimir Putin.
I am not a fan of Vladimir Putin. I think Vladimir Putin is an enemy of the United States. By the same token, I assure you, Donald Trump and any future American president as well is going to have to interact with Vladimir Putin because he has the largest nuclear stockpile in the world, because he has one of the world's largest militaries, because they're a power in the world that has to be dealt with.
In addition to his previous announcements, CBS News has also learned Trump intends to name South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem as Homeland Security Secretary, former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee as U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Steve Witkoff as Special Envoy to the Middle East, William McGinley for White House Counsel, and John Ratcliffe as CIA Director. On Wednesday, Trump is expected to take his first steps inside the White House since he left office in January of 2021. He'll meet with President Biden in the Oval Office. Biden invited his successor to the White House soon after the election was called last week. CBS News political director Fin Gomez joins us now. Let's go ahead and start, Fin, with Marco Rubio. What do we know about how he would approach foreign policy?
Hi, Lindsay. How are you? So I've been covering Marco Rubio since 2007, and actually in 2010 is when he launched the Senate race that upset then Charlie Crist and led him to where he is now. And throughout his career, Lindsay, it's really been a focus on Russia, on China, on Cuba, and I think this has really sort of crystallized his perspective on foreign policy. He is a bit hawkish in comparison to what some of Trump's core beliefs, and that positioning, that posturing, if you will, one has been softened over the last couple of years by the senior senator from Florida, but also there's been some friction within Trump world because of that position. He's had some critics, including RFK Jr., who weighed in on his candidacy recently, but also from some of his from some of President-elect Trump's advisors in his family, including Don Jr., who believe that his positioning does not align with the MAGA core perspective of more of isolationism, if you will, in contrast to more of a hawkish foreign policy. Lindsay.
And looking at some of these appointments, some people might be wondering, Stefanik does not have a diplomatic background. Zeldin is not known for his environmental focus. Noem is not from a border state. What's the reason behind some of these choices?
There are three things that are happening here. I think you can remember it. It can be typified, Lindsay, with it's that these nominations are coming in fast. They're coming in furious. And also the third F is fealty. The converging point across these candidacies, if you will, for these high-ranking positions in the incoming Trump administration is the fact that they are loyal to Donald Trump. This has been tested and tried, if you will, during the primaries and also in the lead up to the election. There were a couple people who got cut from the list, I was told, because they were sort of shaky on their endorsing or positioning of support for Trump during the primaries. And that's something that you're seeing now. These folks, the people that he has on this list, these short listers, Lindsay, are very loyal to Donald Trump.
We've also learned that Trump will name John Ratcliffe for CIA director. What do we know about his background?
He is the former head of DNI, of National Intelligence, which is like a top advisor to the president under the first iteration of the Trump administration. He is a loyalist as well. He's very close to Donald Trump, and has has like both, if you will, the alignments of the Republican Party on when it comes to intelligence, when it comes to foreign policy, all aligned with him, with the MAGA world, more traditional republicanism, if you will, with that perspective. But it's someone who is a loyalist to Donald Trump, and I think you're going to see that in his actions. It will be lockstep with the president-elect.
Fast, furious, and fealty may be the quote of the day. Fin Gomez, thank you so much.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Now, this comes as Trump's transition team has been busy selecting new members of his administration. The latest name added to the list, this man, Fox News host and veteran Pete Hegseth for Secretary of Defense. Trump also announced plans for a new agency called the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE. It will focus on regulating federal spending and will be led by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. Trump has also appointed former Arkansas governor and Baptist preacher Mike Huckabee as ambassador to Israel and real estate investor Steve Witkoff as special envoy to the Middle East. Now, these are in addition to several other high-profile roles in Trump's cabinet. You're seeing them here. It includes John Ratcliffe as CIA director and Governor Kristi Noem as the Homeland Security Secretary. For more on all of this, let's bring in CBS News political director Fin Gomez joining us from our Washington bureau this morning. Wow, Finn. There appears to be some surprise there on Capitol Hill about Trump's Department of Defense nominee, Pete Hegseth. Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski, in fact, is saying, quote, we have it for our viewers, I'm just surprised. I'm not going to comment whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. I'm just surprised because the names that I've heard for Secretary of Defense have not included him. Who is this man? Will he get confirmed?
That's a great question. Donald Trump does have a majority will have a majority in the Senate, right? But you do have Senator Murkowski, others who have been vocal critics of Donald Trump. I mean, she did not indicate there about whether she would vote for Hegseth as the head of the DOD. But this is something that, we have heard Democrats being critical of this pick. As you mentioned, Hegseth is known to Fox viewers as the Fox and Friends weekend host, right? He's also, and this is important to note, across these picks is the fact that he is a Trump loyalist. He was someone who's been on the campaign trail with Donald Trump. He's been at rallies. He's someone who is lockstep with this new incoming administration, and that's what Donald Trump wants. If you go back to 2016, and I was there for the transition as well, Errol, for that one, and in that one he listened to a lot to the RNC people, to people, if you remember, Rights Priebus, folks from the party that he inherited. This is now his pick. These are loyalists to Trump. And Hegseth is someone who is very popular with his MAGA base, with one of his key advisors, his son, Donald Trump Jr., and others who have been very vocal about having him in the administration. However, will he hit some turbulence before landing getting through the Senate? He may.
Yeah, and the difference this time, Finn, to 2016 is that a majority of Americans voted for Trump's style of change to come to Washington.
All right, let's bring in CBS News political reporter Libby Cathy to talk more about the Trump transition. So, Libby, walk our audience through exactly what Elon Musk, a billionaire who spent hundreds of millions of dollars in his attempt to help the president-elect win re-election to the White House, what he and Vivek Ramaswamy would be tasked with in the Trump administration. And I feel like there's sort of a little bit of trolling going on there that the name of this pseudo government organization has the initials that spell out Doge, which is a cryptocurrency that Elon Musk touts all the time, which is probably going to make him more money.
Yeah, good to be with you, Vlad. Elon Musk, the world's richest man, having President Trump's ear this week at Mar-a-Lago, and for some time before that, as you mentioned, donating millions to his campaign. Well, that seems to be paying off in an appointment, per se, this pseudo-government department, as you call it, the Department of Government Efficiency. Trump announced yesterday that Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy would lead this department. Now, there's a lot of questions about what exactly it would do, but the initials, the acronym DOGE, Doge, that is a little bit of a trolling, as you mentioned, referring to that meme of the winking dog. Musk's posts very often on the platform Twitter. He just bought X now. But Doge, this Department of Government Efficiency, lots of questions on what exactly it will do, how exactly it will work, but it's meant to cut spending. Vivek Ramaswamy on the campaign trail, when he was challenging now President-elect Donald Trump for the Republican nomination, talked about cutting some 200,000 jobs from the federal workplace, or 10% of the federal workforce. So that's what we're expecting. Elon Musk posted over Twitter this morning saying that the department will be transparent, that they will post how our taxpayers' dollars are being spent. But really, this is showing how much influence Musk has over Trump, with Trump. He's traveling with him today in Washington, joining him at that meeting with Republican lawmakers right now. And this comes as Musk has tons of contracts with the government, with Starlink, with Tesla. So we will see how their relationship plays out in the coming weeks, but so far has had a very close ear to the former president, now the president-elect. Vlad.
Welcome back to America Decides. Former Congressman Matt Gaetz was once investigated by the very same department he now hopes to lead. The Justice Department looked into sex trafficking allegations against Gaetz for years. It decided not to charge Gaetz and closed the probe last year. The House Ethics Committee, though, has been investigating claims of sexual misconduct and other violations against Gaetz before he resigned yesterday. He has denied wrongdoing, we should note. CBS News investigative producer Michael Kaplan joins us now. Michael, you have been investigating these investigations for years. What do we know about what could be in this House ethics report, and will it ever see the light of day?
Well, Nancy, we know it could be quite damaging. In June, the committee underlined some of the allegations it was reviewing, including sexual misconduct, illicit drug use, financial impropriety. And it's really those sexual misconduct claims that could prove to be the most explosive. We know at least 4 women have come and testified in front of the committee, telling them they were paid to attend parties with drugs and sex, where Rep. Gaetz was also present. And we know that one of those women has said that she had sex with Gaetz when she was just 17 years old. Her attorney said in a statement today she was a, quote, high school student and there were witnesses. So that just gives you a sense of some of the details that could come out in this report. Gaetz has previously denied all wrongdoing and, has called the committee's investigation a frivolous smear campaign. But he must, it's no surprise he might be feeling relieved that this report may never see the light of day.
Right, because now that he's resigned, there's a good chance that the House Ethics Committee could just drop the whole thing. Michael, can you explain why the Justice Department looked into some of these allegations as well, investigating sex trafficking in particular, but then dropped those allegations?
Yeah, well, DOJ had investigated Gaetz as part of a larger sex trafficking probe that they opened back in 2019. And this was when President Trump was still president. In fact, as we've since learned, Gaetz had asked Trump for a blanket pardon ahead of Trump leaving office because this investigation was coming down the pike. While the Justice Department brought charges against some of Gaetz' associates, some of whom are in prison now, no charges were ever brought against Gaetz himself. This was going to be a document where some of those details in the investigation, in the DOJ investigation, were ultimately laid out in some sort of official document.
There are some senators who say they deserve to see whatever is in this Ethics Committee report. Obviously, the public has an interest in knowing about the allegations against this person who could be the nation's top law enforcement official. How does it work with the Ethics Committee when someone who they are investigating ends up resigning from Congress or leaving in some other way, as we just saw Gaetz do yesterday when he said now that he has been picked to be AG, he's resigning from Congress?
Well, previously they've shut down their investigation because the member is no longer in Congress. Obviously, this is a sort of unprecedented situation, and people close to the committee who I've spoken with say it's hard to imagine that this document or the details in this document never sees the light of day. As you mentioned, Democratic senators are asking for not only the report but the underlying information ahead of what is expected to be a pretty contentious confirmation hearing. But the committee itself is sort of not commenting on its investigation or on whether they'll ultimately release these findings.
Yeah, damaging information has a way of getting out on Capitol Hill, one way or the other. Michael Kaplan, investigative reporter for CBS News, thanks so much.
Thank you, Nancy.
And now it is official from the president-elect himself. Donald Trump has named RFK Jr. as his pick for Health and Human Services Secretary. In a post on social media, the president-elect wrote, in part, quote, Mr. Kennedy will restore these agencies to the traditions of gold standard scientific research and beacons of transparency to end the chronic disease epidemic and to make America great and healthy again. Now, if confirmed, Kennedy would be in charge of the CDC, National Institutes of Health, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, and the FDA with a budget of nearly $2 trillion annually. CBS News political reporter Olivia Rinaldi is in West Palm Beach, Florida. That's also where the president-elect is. So, Olivia, we have been talking a lot about how controversial some of these picks are and what many of them have in common, and certainly RFK Jr. falls into this bucket, is how much they have expressed publicly disdain for how these organizations that they are now being tapped to run have been run in the past. Talk to us about how significant it is that RFK Jr. is going to be nominated to this post.
Well, as you mentioned, the former president now making it official, and you can see some of those undertones of that distrust, even in his announcement, talking about the chronic disease epidemic and saying that HHS will play a big role in helping ensure that everyone will be protected from harmful chemicals, pollutants, pesticides, pharmaceutical products, and food additives. And really the central point of this that we were getting at earlier was that Trump is now appointing people to these crucial cabinet roles that are distrustful of the agencies themselves, including Matt Gaetz leading the Attorney General, leading the DOJ, including the DOD as well for Pete Hegseth. So all of this very interesting to see this happening time and time again with these picks that he's choosing.
And in his victory speech, Trump said he's going to help make America healthy again. He wants to do some things. We're going to let him get to it. Go have a good time, Bobby. So we knew that he was on the short list. What are some of those things that he wants to do? Do we know how RFK Jr. is expected to reform Health and Human Services?
Well, I think we can see just from some of this statement that Trump says handling the chronic disease epidemic. That's something RFK Jr. talked about very consistently on the campaign trail. That is his major focus, and removing food additives from, things like cereal. He was talking about, I believe it's called Red 40, which is a dye that gets added into food. That's something I could see RFK Jr. tackling. We also mentioned the fluoride in the water policy. That's something he brought up several weeks ago, saying that it should be removed because he believes it causes unintended health consequences for children and people who consume it. So notable there that he then ended up speaking to President Donald Trump about that, and Trump said he would be open to any of these policies that RFK is talking about implementing. So all of this very interesting that he's open to this wide range of policies. But on the chronic disease epidemic, it's something he's talked about for a very, very long time. So for this appointment to happen, subsequent Senate confirmation, all very notable of some significant changes that could be coming at Health and Human Services.
So you have interviewed RFK Jr., Olivia. You did it fairly recently after he endorsed President-elect Trump out on the campaign trail, because prior to that, he was running for the presidency himself. What did he have to tell you about his support for the president-elect?
Well, they've become very close in recent months. I'm struck by, the transformation of RFK Jr. and Trump's relationship over the course of this entire campaign. We know that RFK was running as a Democratic presidential candidate, subsequently dropped out, then ran as an independent, subsequently dropped out after that, and then endorsed the former president. And I'm remembering just from times on the campaign trail when we've been able to ask Trump questions. I asked him back in April when he was up in New York for his trial what he thought of RFK Jr. And he said he's a great guy and I've known him for a long time. Later on, Trump said, I know nothing about him and I don't know him. And now, of course, the two of them are close, and he'll be serving, if confirmed, as his Health and Human Services Secretary. So a typical Trump evolution there for RFK Jr. in his orbit. But they are close. They talk very often, and Trump is very open to hearing policies that he puts forth.
And Olivia, tell our viewers a little bit about RFK Jr.'s qualifications, some of his controversial positions, and given those two things, his possibility or likelihood of actually receiving a Senate confirmation.
Well, with this nomination, it's putting a vaccine skeptic in the driver's seat of overseeing all vaccines and production in the country. That's really important to underscore there. With this appointment, he'll be leading or in charge of overseeing the Center for Disease Control, the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. Part of the FDA has an advisory board that oversees, trials into vaccines and pharmaceuticals in the country. So to put someone who's deeply skeptical already of vaccines, of pharmaceutical companies overseeing those agencies, it's deeply important to understand what that could mean and the transformation that we could see for health guidelines in the country. These are also, in that position, you're also in charge of setting some health guidelines and meeting with doctors and advisory boards about what's best on certain items. And I mentioned this earlier, but I'm struck by what happened in 2020 during Trump's last administration with the pandemic, where Health and Human Services became such a key role in conjunction with the Centers for Disease Control and the FDA in approving and greenlighting the coronavirus vaccine as quickly as it was. If we were tasked with another pandemic, what would that look like in this country, and what would that vaccine look like? We also know RFK Jr. is deeply skeptical of the coronavirus vaccine, as well as several other vaccines that children are supposed to get in their young age. And this is coming as there's really been a wave across the country of that deep skepticism of the COVID vaccine, but also vaccines that children get for polio and other issues as well. We've seen some spikes in those across the country. So it's coming at a time that really speaks to a concern that people have. It's part of the reason why Trump put him in that role, is to speak to those concerns.
And he will be in charge of all of those issues, as well as reproductive health care, the Affordable Care Act, and other things that Health and Human Services oversees. Olivia Rinaldi, thank you.
Let's begin with the Trump transition. The president-elect has announced he wants North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum to run the Department of Interior. Burgum originally challenged Trump for the Republican nomination. Meanwhile, there are new revelations about his pick for Secretary of Defense. Officials in Monterey, California, have confirmed that they looked into sexual assault allegations against Peter Hegseth in 2017. His lawyers tell CBS News that the Army veteran turned Fox News host was already investigated and, quote, cleared. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Trump's pick for Secretary of Health and Human Services, was at Mar-a-Lago last night for the America First Policy Institute Gala. While touting his election victory, the president-elect gave a shout-out to Kennedy, who is under scrutiny for his criticism of vaccines.
Don't get too popular, Bobby. You've reached about the level now. We want you to come up with things and ideas and what you've been talking about for a long time, and I think you're going to do some unbelievable thing. Nobody's going to be able to do it like you, and boy, does he feel it in his heart.
Let's bring in CBS News political reporter Olivia Rinaldi, who is covering the transition from West Palm Beach. Olivia, sort of interesting comment there. We know that Trump doesn't like anyone overshadowing his spotlight, but let's go ahead and start with Governor Burgum. He's been a staunch ally in recent months. What can you tell us about him, and how are Republican lawmakers reacting to his selection?
Yeah, good to be with you. Burgum is the two-time governor of North Dakota, who you mentioned ran against President Trump for the Republican primary, but then subsequently dropped out, endorsed him, has been a close ally, and even someone that was considered to potentially be vice president. Last night, Trump making a little bit of a surprise announcement at Mar-a-Lago, announcing him for Secretary of the Interior. Now, in that role, he would oversee federal lands across the U.S., and we know that Trump has talked about increasing oil and drilling permits across the U.S., even using federal lands for that. His nomination, or rather Trump's intention to nominate him, was met very positively on Capitol Hill, with Republican senators applauding the nomination and the pick, and saying that he would be a welcome person for that. Senator Barrasso of Wyoming saying he recognizes how important federal lands are for energy and mineral production. So it seems like he might have a little bit of an easier time getting through that Senate confirmation than perhaps some of other Trump's picks.
Represented Trump in multiple criminal indictments, including one in which he was convicted, the so-called hush money trial. What do we know about their relationship, why Trump tapped him for Deputy Attorney General, and what he will be responsible for?
I think it shows a reliance of Trump on his inner circle, and particularly his defense lawyers and his team of lawyers that have been shepherding him through these several trials that he's been involved in. We know that Todd Blanche was the lead defense attorney in that criminal hush money trial in New York, but he also represented Trump in the federal documents case that was unfolding here in Florida. So it shows that reliance he has on his lawyers, but he was tapped for Deputy Attorney General. That's a role that will need to be confirmed through the Senate. But in that role, they're essentially doing all the day-to-day work that's going on at the Department of Justice. So they're overseeing budgets, personnel, staff, and really implementing those key initiatives. So Trump entrusting someone who he's worked with before very closely, especially over the last year and a half, into that role, really indicative of how he sees the government, who he wants to install, perhaps loyalists into these positions.
What other picks has Trump made today?
We've heard about Stephen Cheung being tapped to be communications director. He was communications director of the campaign, a bit of a firebrand, one to throw punches back on X. So an interesting announcement there, an important announcement there, as they start to really firm up some of the other departments, not only the cabinet, but what communications out of the White House are going to look like.
The president-elect has also selected Karoline Leavitt to serve as White House press secretary. Leavitt was the national press secretary for Trump's re-election campaign. The 27-year-old also served as assistant press secretary in Trump's first administration before unsuccessfully running for Congress in New Hampshire. In a statement, Trump called Leavitt smart, tough, and a highly effective communicator.